in the Old Testament from Genesis all the way to the prophets. We just don't pay attention to it when we're reading. But there were ancient Jews who paid very close attention to passages like these. And they realized that something very, very strange is going on. There's one God.
These verses where Jesus is specifically asked to clarify his relationship to the Father and tells us that he is only in relationship with him in such a way that everybody else can be in relationship with them too.
Did Jesus claim to be God? Yes, he did. And I'm sure many of you have some verses going through your heads right now. However, I'm convinced that the primary way Jesus claimed to be God, and that his followers claimed he's God, gets overlooked by most Christians and non-Christians because we've lost touch with first century Jewish culture, and we just tend to not notice things. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Here's a quote from Daniel Boyarin in his book, The Jewish Gospels, The Story of Jesus Christ, the story of the Jewish Christ. He says, most, if not all, of the ideas and practices of the Jesus movement of the first century and the beginning of the second century, and even later, can be safely understood as part of the ideas and practices that we understand to be the Judaism of the period. The ideas of Trinity and incarnation, or certainly the germs of those ideas, were already present among Jewish believers well before Jesus came on the scene to incarnate in himself, as it were, those theological notions and take up his messianic calling. So the ideas were there, paving the way for Jesus, who embodied them. Now, who is Daniel Boyarin to say that Christian ideas like the Trinity and the incarnation were already present in some form in first century Judaism? Is he a Christian apologist? No, he's a scholar of rabbinic Judaism. He's a Talmud scholar. He points out that a lot of the beliefs we now think of as distinctively Christian actually weren't. The earliest Christian church was embedded in first century Jewish culture, but as Christianity spread, it became dominated by Gentile Christians who tended to lose touch with the Jewish framework. And something was happening within Judaism as well. As Jewish orthodoxy was forming in the second century, the rabbis tended to weed out certain ideas that had once been familiar in Judaism, but which had been adopted by Christians. The rabbis wanted to clearly distinguish Judaism from Christianity, and some of the ideas that were present in first century Judaism were soon deemed heretical. So Christians lost touch with the Jewish framework of early Christianity, and Jews abandoned some of the Jewish ideas that became part of Christianity. And the result is that today it's easy for us to miss a few things when we're reading the Bible. Claims that would have been understood by listeners at the time might not be understood by us. Here in my opening statement, I'm going to briefly discuss the forgotten Jewish idea that's most relevant for understanding how Jesus claimed to be God. And then I'll show how this forgotten Jewish idea illuminates various passages in the New Testament. Some of you are familiar with the early Jewish belief in the two powers in heaven. Alan Siegel, a Jewish scholar, drew attention to this in his 1977 book, Two Powers in Heaven. And lots of people, especially Christians, have been interested in the topic ever since. Here's the idea in a nutshell. The Old Testament is very clear that there's one true God. But there are numerous passages in the Old Testament where we see two divine figures. I'll give a few quick examples. There are tons of these. Sometimes God seems to be in two different places doing two different things. A common example is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. The Lord appears to Abraham and tells him that he's going down to Sodom and Gomorrah to see firsthand how bad the people are. So he goes down to Sodom and Gomorrah. And what happens? Genesis 19:24, then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. The Lord on earth rained down fire from the Lord out of heaven. This thing reboot every couple minutes. It sounds like there are two lords here. Watch what happens in Zechariah 2. Pay attention or you'll miss it. Come, Zion, escape, you who live in daughter Babylon. For this is what the Lord Almighty says. Who's speaking? The Lord Almighty. And he says, after the glorious one has sent me, the Lord was sent by the glorious one, against the nations that have plundered you, for whoever touches you touches the apple of his eye. I will surely raise my hand against them, so that their slaves will plunder them. Then you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me. The Lord Almighty was sent by the Lord Almighty. Next paragraph. Shout and be glad, daughter Zion, for I am coming, and I will live among you, declares the Lord, Yahweh. Many nations will be joined with the Lord in that day and will become my people. I will live among you, and you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me to you. The Lord, Yahweh, will live among them, and they will know that the Lord was sent by the Lord Almighty. So Yahweh rains down fire from Yahweh. Yahweh is sent by Yahweh. Plenty of passages like these. Then we've got a mysterious figure called the angel of the Lord. Whatever you think of when you think about angels, just get rid of that. The angel of the Lord is no ordinary angel, because this angel is somehow the Lord. Angel just means messenger. In Hebrew, it can refer to a human messenger, a spirit messenger, or in this case, the Lord himself. Look at Judges 6. The angel of the Lord came and sat down to talk to Gideon. The angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon. Then it switches to, the Lord turned to him. The Lord answered. Then it goes back to the angel of the Lord. Then, when Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, Alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. But the Lord said to him, Peace, do not be afraid, you are not going to die. If you see the Lord in all his glory, you're dead. But if you see the angel of the Lord, who is somehow the Lord, you might survive. One more example of this. Here's Jacob blessing Joseph in Genesis 48. Then he blessed Joseph and said, May the God before whom my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, walked faithfully, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. He, singular. So the God, and the angel are all referring to the same being. The angel is God, but the angel is the messenger of God. This is all over the place in the Old Testament, from Genesis all the way to the prophets. We just don't pay attention to it when we're reading. But there were ancient Jews who paid very close attention to passages like these. And they realized that something very, very strange is going on. There's one God, but there were two powers, two authorities in heaven. If you put all of the passages together, it seems like there's God you can't be around because his presence would destroy you, and God you can be around somehow. There's God you can't be around and God you can be around. The God you can't be around is distinct from the God you can be around. They interact with each other. One sends the other, and yet they're both God. This was all very, very confusing to first century Jews. If there's one God, why are there two powers in heaven?
David Wood points to the two powers in heaven theory to argue that Jews were already expecting a divine Messiah, but that's misleading. The two powers idea was never mainstream. Scholars like Alan Siegel, whom Wood cites, say it was condemned as heresy by Rabbinic Judaism by the 2nd century. It was mostly found in apocalyptic fringe sects, like those behind the Book of Enoch, not the dominant Pharisaic tradition Jesus grew up in. Also, Wood relies on Hebrew Bible passages that use metaphor and repetition, a known literary device in ancient Hebrew. For example, Genesis 19:24 saying, "The Lord rained fire from the Lord," is a classic example of Hebrew parallelism, not a claim of dual divine beings. This is widely understood by scholars of Semitic literature, such as Michael Heiser, who notes that while some texts may reflect divine plurality, they don't support a Trinitarian view. Even Daniel Boyarin, who's often misused by apologists, does not say Jesus claimed to be God. He explores how early Christian communities reinterpreted Jewish mystical language to elevate Jesus, but that's post hoc theology, not something Jesus clearly taught. Most critically, there is no direct quote in any gospel where Jesus says, "I am God." That absence is striking if he truly meant to reveal himself as divine in a first-century Jewish context that was strictly monotheistic. So the claim that Jesus clearly declared himself divine relies on reinterpretation, anachronistic readings, and later Christian theology, not on solid historical evidence.
I want to begin with a verse from the Old Testament which might become relevant momentarily. And that is, well, a psalm, not in its entirety, but Psalm 82. Psalm 82 is a curious psalm because it opens by saying that God presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods. Elohim. That is definitely the word for gods. This seems to be an indication that God is talking about, or the psalmist is talking about, the so-called divine council, which also shows up in Job, for example. Later in the psalm he says, I said, you are gods, you are all sons of the Most High. The psalmist is referring to beings here who are definitively not Yahweh, but calling them gods, which is kind of interesting. I'm not trying to make a point out of that. Jesus is going to do that for me as we turn to what I think is the most important Christological gospel of the four, which is, of course, John's gospel. Many people think that I just dismiss John's gospel because it's written too late or something. It is, of course, the least historically reliable of the gospels, but I'm willing to just treat it as if it's historically reliable for the purposes of this debate and see what Jesus actually says about himself. The question we're interested in here is the relationship that Jesus has to his Father. David has been speaking about the two powers in heaven heresy and saying that Jesus' relationship to the Father is the kind of relationship that the people who believed in these two powers was talking about. Well, let's investigate that in Jesus' own words. There's one place in the Gospels where Jesus is directly accused of claiming to be God. Do you know where it is? It's in John chapter 10. In John chapter 10, his Jewish opponents come to him and say, if you're the Messiah, tell us plainly. And Jesus responds by saying, I and the Father are one. I'm told by Christians this is a direct Christological claim. Who can claim to be identical to the Father except for someone who is God? And there was no confusion about this. The Jewish opponents picked up stones to stone him to death for making this claim. Now, how does Jesus respond? Does he agree with them? Or does he correct them? He says, in response to the Jews, is it not written in your law, I have said you are gods? Quoting, as you'll probably realize, the psalm that I just quoted and explained briefly a moment ago. So directly asked about his Christological status, Jesus decides to quote a psalm which is explicitly talking about beings who are not in fact Yahweh and yet are called gods. Why would he pick that psalm if the message he wanted to convey was that he is in fact in some sense God, that is, identical to Yahweh? Jesus continues, if he called them gods, why wouldn't he call me God, the one who the Father has sent and set aside? So why then do you accuse me of blasphemy because I said I am God's son? Like in the divine council, you shall be called gods, that is, sons of the Most High. So it's a misunderstanding. Jesus immediately afterwards clarifies further and says, believe the works, that is the works of my Father through me, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father. Another pretty intense Christological claim. What does it mean? Let's turn to the most important Christological chapter in John's Gospel, which is, of course, chapter 17. Jesus is praying, first for his disciples, then for all of his believers. Remember, in John chapter 10 so far, Jesus has made two claims. I and the Father are one, and I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, addressing the relationship that he has to his Father, which David thinks is the two powers in heaven. What does Jesus say in his own words? John chapter 17, verses 20 onwards. My prayer is not for them alone, the disciples. I pray also for those who believe in me through their message, that is, all of you, that all of them may be one. Hen, H-E-N, the same Greek word used in John 10. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us. This is crucial, this is pivotal. When Jesus is asked to clarify his Christological status, what is his relationship to the Father? He says, I'm in the Father and the Father's in me. He then later prays that all of us will one day be in God in the same way, just as, kathos in the Greek, which doesn't just mean as, it means in the same way as, just as. If this is supposed to indicate that Jesus is claiming to be identical to Yahweh, what does that make the rest of us? And how, I'm interested in knowing, is David going to interpret these verses where Jesus is specifically asked to clarify his relationship to the Father and tells us that he is only in relationship with him in such a way that everybody else can be in relationship with them too. The same thing is true of another important quote from John's Gospel, which is when Philip asks Jesus to show him the Father. What does Jesus say? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. Another intense Christological claim. He then follows up by saying, how can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. So again, Jesus clarifies his relationship to the Father, this time saying that he doesn't speak on his own authority. But there's more. In the same chapter this time, chapter 14, just a few verses later, he says to those same disciples who he's just told, that if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, because the Father is in me, and I'm in the Father. He speaks of a future day past his crucifixion and says, on that day, verse 20, on that day you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. So to recap, Jesus is directly asked to clarify his relationship and his Christology to the Father. And he says that I'm in the Father, and the Father's in me, and guess what? You'll all be one with us too, one day. If this is a claim to be Yahweh, then, well, lucky us, I suppose.
Alex is absolutely right to point out that when Jesus is accused of claiming to be God in John 10, his response isn't to confirm it. It's to quote Psalm 82, where other beings are called gods metaphorically. This shows Jesus is not identifying as Yahweh, but rather as someone set apart, like those divine agents. Now Christians often treat I and the Father are one as a declaration of divinity, but in John 17, Jesus uses the exact same Greek word hen to say he wants his followers to be one with God in the same way he is. If oneness with God makes Jesus divine, then all believers must be too, which is obviously not Christian theology. Jesus clearly means unity of purpose, not identity of nature. And when he says, the Father lives in me, that isn't divine possession. In John 14, he says the same thing will happen to his followers. You are in me, and I am in you. Again, it's about spiritual unity, not ontology. As Hitchens pointed out again and again, if this were really God in human form, he wouldn't speak in riddles. He wouldn't need theologians and translators 2,000 years later to explain what he supposedly meant. The fact that Jesus never clearly says, I am God, in any gospel, shows that the claim of divinity is a later church invention, not something Jesus ever taught.
I showed that in the first century there was an interesting discussion within Judaism about the two powers in heaven. They had various ways of dealing with this. And we can see why when we read passages like Genesis 22, the story of Abraham and Isaac. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. So this is God saying to Abraham, take your son. Verse 11, but the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. This is when he starts to do it. Here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. So this is the angel of the Lord saying, you haven't withheld from me your only son. And it was God who ordered Abraham to do this. So we have situations like this, and I argue that Jesus enters the discussion when they're confused about the two powers in heaven and claims to be one of them. And so there we looked at what Jesus says, what Jesus does, what his friends say, what his friends do, what his enemies say, and what his enemies do. Alex seems to suggest that there could be some sort of angel or something like this, or even a person who's endowed with this kind of divine authority. I got problems with this even here in Genesis. So look at what this said. Then the Lord, Genesis 33, then the Lord said to Moses, leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt, and go up to the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you, because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way. Who is accompanying them and guiding them? Well, the angel of the Lord. But here he says, I'm not going with you this time. So this is the Lord speaking. It's not the angel of the Lord, and you say, oh, this is the Lord. This is the Lord speaking. This is the Lord speaking, says, I'm not going up with you now, when it was the angel of the Lord who was accompanying them. So these are the sorts of things you have, and people tried to figure out how to deal with this. And they came up, again, with all sorts of ways, and Jesus entered the picture and claimed to be one of the two powers in heaven. So what Jesus says, we went through 3 examples of Jesus claiming to be one of the two powers. He's the divine Son of the Father, he's the Lord of King David, and he's the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. And we saw how people reacted to him claiming to be the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. In response, Alex was he quoted Psalm 82, and then Jesus using this passage. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So they accused Jesus of claiming to be God. And Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law, I have said you are gods? If he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and scripture cannot be set aside, what about the one whom the Father set apart as his very own and sent into the world? So Jesus is sent into the world, according to this passage. Why then do you accuse me of blasphemy because I said I am God's son? This is not, and I have no idea how you would ever read the Gospel of John like this, let alone anything else Jesus said. This is not Jesus saying, what? You're misunderstanding. I'm just a regular dude. Again, if this were the only verse in there, maybe, because given the rest of what we read in the Gospel of John and the rest of the Gospels, Jesus is not claiming to be a regular guy. He's using a legal technicality here that they should be aware of. They're saying, hey, here's what you're claiming. You're claiming to be the Son of God. This means you're claiming to be equal to God and so on, and therefore, this is blasphemy. And Jesus' response is, well, really? Well, in the Psalms, God calls people Elohim. Therefore, you can't just say calling someone some divine title is blasphemous and deserves a death sentence. You have to show that that the title is not from God, that it's not true, that it's false. Have you done that? No. Okay, you can't kill me. You can't just say there's a claim and therefore we will kill you over it. So that's a legal technicality. Again, if you're somehow reading this as, see, Jesus is just claiming to be a regular guy, wow. All right. So we have John 17:5. And now, Father, glorify me in your presence with the glory I had with you before the world began. Why? Alex quoted John 17 to show that Jesus is just claiming some regular relationship that we can all have with God or something along those lines. What does Jesus say in the same chapter that Alex is quoting? And now, Father, glorify me in your presence with the glory I had with you before the world began. That sounds like Jesus is claiming to have glory with the Father before the world began. Doesn't sound like he's claiming to be a regular guy. Doesn't sound like he's saying, oh, you guys are just misunderstanding everything I said. It's just one big misunderstanding. So what Jesus does, we've looked at it. I think he said he's going to respond to it. So what does Jesus do? He's the judge. He's the final judge of all people, according to him. Again, the Old Testament says that Yahweh is the one who's going to sit on his throne in judgment. Jesus said, yeah, that's me. The Old Testament says that Yahweh is the one who raises the dead. Jesus says that he's the one who raises the dead at the resurrection. The people in their graves are going to hear the voice of the Son of God. Now that is very strange if that's how we all are. We're all going to be raised from the dead by the Son of God. If that's him saying, oh, we're all just the same and we can all, you'll be in me and I'll be in you. Very strange way of putting things.
Let's be clear. When Jesus is accused in John 10 of claiming to be God, he doesn't affirm it. He deflects. He quotes Psalm 82, where the term gods refers to human beings, members of a divine council, or even unjust earthly judges, not divine beings equal to Yahweh. Scholars like Bart Ehrman and John J. Collins agree. This psalm uses the term gods in a figurative or functional sense, not literal divinity. If Jesus wanted to confirm he was God, he had every opportunity, but instead, he points to a passage that describes non-divine beings being called gods, and then says, why do you accuse me of blasphemy for saying I'm the Son of God? That's not affirmation, it's distancing. And when he says I and the Father are one, he later uses the same Greek word hen to pray that his disciples will all be one with him and the Father in the same way. If oneness with God means literal divinity, then all believers are divine. That's clearly not the intent. Scholars like James D.G. Dunn and Raymond Brown point out that John's gospel uses metaphorical language, not strict metaphysical definitions. Jesus being in the Father is about spiritual unity and purpose, not substance. In fact, Jesus consistently refers to God as someone other than himself. My Father, the one who sent me, greater than I. That's not how you talk if you're claiming you are that same God.
We heard about the angel of Yahweh and the suggestion that this might indeed just be Jesus. It might be. Look, I don't claim to be the sort of final authority on exegesis here. I'm simply asking you to consider what you think is a more appropriate explanation. I've suggested the divine name-bearing model as opposed to the two powers in heaven. And when I look at passages such as Exodus 23, verses 20 to 21, see, I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way. Pay attention to him and listen to what he says. Do not rebel against him. He will not forgive your rebellion, since my name is in him. I just ask which interpretation lends itself more nicely to the passages. David's rebuttal there seemed to suggest that I was under the impression that Jesus is just some dude. That is far, far from the case, especially in John's Gospel, where Jesus seems to posit himself as something of a model of faith for his disciples. And for what it's worth, this is kind of the image that I get of Jesus reading through the Gospels. What is he supposed to be? Something like an idyllic, faithful servant of God, and certainly in a special position. If you include the epistles in particular, then Jesus is, of course, exalted. But I want to get into that, but I suppose I should turn to Philippians chapter 2, which David mentions. Of course, we're not talking about Jesus' own words anymore, but it's still quite interesting what people came to believe. The mindset of Jesus Christ, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God as something to be used to his own advantage, but rather made himself nothing, as I'm sure you all know. That word grasped there, harpagmon, or something like that. I'm not very good at pronouncing the Greek, but it means something like to steal, to seize. Isn't it a bit strange that if Jesus is God, he didn't consider equality with God as something to be seized, to be stolen? That's how that word is used in the Greek language. How can he steal something that's already rightfully his? And indeed, because he then died on the cross and humbled himself even to death, therefore he was given the name that was above all other names. Therefore. So whatever exalted position Jesus is given here in Philippians 2, and by the way, he is given it, he's given it because of his crucifixion. Therefore he's given the name above other names. Again, which interpretation lends itself more nicely to these passages? For what it's worth, my favorite interpretation, I was discussing this the other night at dinner with, well, not with David actually, that would be giving too much away, but is this so-called Adamic. James Dunn has written about this, the sort of Adam Christology as applies to Philippians 2, who being in the very nature of God, this word meaning like the form of God. If we consider that Jesus is supposed to be the answer to Adam's sin and Jesus redeems. Adam is made in the image of God and considers equality with God as something to be grasped, to be seized when he takes of the fruit and eats it. And that is how man falls. So how is man redeemed? Well, Jesus Christ, though also being made in the form of a God, in the image of God, did not consider equality with God something to be seized. Not him, but humbled himself. Therefore, Jesus is exalted. We're told in Hebrews chapter 2 that for a time Jesus is made lower than the angels, presumably while he's here on earth. Again, it just reads to me as if at least while on earth, Jesus is certainly not approximating Yahweh, but he's also not just some dude. David mentioned the glory that's given to Jesus in John chapter 17, verse 5. The same chapter that I was using. Yeah. Verse 5, Father, glorify me in the presence that I had with you before the world was created. Just keep reading John chapter 17 and see what Jesus wants to do with that glory. In fact, the very passage that I quoted, my prayer is not for them alone, I pray that all may be one, Father, just as you're in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, blah, blah, blah. Immediately afterwards, so they may be brought into complete unity. Then they will know, I've copied the wrong passage actually. Jesus says that the glory you've given me, I will give to them. In John chapter 17. He says, the glory you've given me, I will give to them, the disciples. We're told in Isaiah, in the book of Isaiah, that God shares his glory with nobody. And this is sometimes a suggestion that's made is sometimes that because Jesus says, glorify me, God, in John chapter 17, he must be God because God shares his glory with nobody. But people just seem to forget that in the same chapter, Jesus says that he will give the glory that he has been given by the Father to the disciples too. Again, all I'm asking you to consider is however you interpret these verses where Jesus is given glory, Jesus is given the judgment, and bear in mind that Jesus is given all of these things, what he then does with those things, and whether he delegates them to other people. Because if he does, then it's clearly not just something that can be delegated to God himself. Only God judges. Only God can judge, but Jesus says that he will judge. Jesus also promises judgment over the 12 tribes of Israel to the disciples. So are the disciples God? Jesus forgives sins, and only God can forgive sins.
Alex raises a crucial point here. If Jesus were God, why does the New Testament describe his authority, glory, and name as something given to him, not inherently possessed? Philippians 2 clearly states that because Jesus humbled himself, therefore God exalted him. If he already was God, why does he need to be exalted? The Greek word harpagmon, often translated grasped or seized, reinforces this. Scholars like James Dunn and N.T. Wright explain that it refers to something not already possessed, something that would be taken by force, not by right. Jesus didn't seize equality with God because, by the author's view, he didn't have it in the first place. And when Jesus says in John 17, "The glory you have given me I have given to them," it completely undermines the argument that divine glory proves divinity. According to Isaiah, God shares his glory with no one. Yet Jesus shares it with his disciples. That's not something Yahweh would do. Unless, of course, Jesus is not Yahweh. Even judgment and forgiveness, things supposedly exclusive to God, are given to the disciples in the Gospels. In Matthew 19:28, Jesus promises the 12 will judge the tribes of Israel. Does that make them divine too? Clearly not. So the simplest, most coherent reading is this. Jesus was an exalted, chosen figure, a servant of God, not God himself. If Jesus was God, why does he constantly act as if he isn't?
But is the historical issue here then that you think that this claim that the Messiah had been raised was kind of a post facto kind of sort of rationalization of these experiences they had?
They thought he was the Messiah before he died, in my judgment.
Right, so they did think he was the Messiah. And
they weren't expecting him to die.
Right.
He died. One of them, two of them, three of them said, "I've seen the Lord." And then they had to figure out, well, how does that work? And it must mean, if he's alive again, it must mean that God's raised him from the dead.
But there were other...
These are apocalyptic Jews. Apocalyptic Jews, the only way they can imagine life after death is an embodied existence. They don't believe the soul lives on after death. These are Jews. Jews believe that the body and soul are one thing, and that afterlife, if there is an afterlife, it's body and soul. That if they see Jesus alive afterwards, it must mean that his soul has come back into his body. How does that happen? It can only happen when God does it.
Okay.
God has raised him from the dead. Once they say they raised him from the dead, and they already knew he was the Messiah, that's when they start saying the Messiah was raised.
Quick response, and we'll go to a break, and then we'll...
I was just going to say, but there's other categories that they could have, as Jews, thought of. The Maccabees died horrible deaths, and they believed they lived on, exalted in the heaven. And they, you have many other examples of this kind of disembodied continuing to live on, but they will rise again at the final resurrection. But what the early Christians said is that Jesus had risen again now. The resurrection had already begun. Bart agrees with that. But where did that idea come from? That's the unexpectedness.
Yeah, it came from
completely
unexpected.
Right. But you're saying they put it together. You're saying they're the geniuses who put this innovative, unparalleled idea that has changed the world. That all goes back to the brain of Mary Magdalene?
I'm changing the world has nothing to do with it. The issue is, what does an apocalyptic Jew...
It did change the world, though, right?
What does an apocalyptic Jew think if they see somebody who had died, who's alive now? Now, when you see your grandmother in your bedroom 2 weeks after she died, typically today, this happens a lot, 1 out of 8 people in our country have a vision of a deceased loved one and are convinced they're alive again or that they're alive. In our context, we believe that the body and the soul are separable, and the soul lives on afterwards. So when you see your grandmother in your bedroom, as 1 out of 8 people, not necessarily your grandma, but some beloved one, typically what you think is their soul's gone to heaven and they've come down to visit me, because that's our mentality of an afterlife.
But
apocalypticists don't have that. They don't have that view. Their view is that if somebody's alive after they died, it has to be a resurrection because the soul doesn't exist outside the body. So when they see Jesus, he's got to have a soul back in the body, which means God has raised him from the dead. That's the first thing they know, and they don't have any theology about it. It's just, oh my God, he's come back from the dead, and then they work it out.
Quick response, and we'll go to our break.
No, Josephus, for example, definitely believes souls exist.
He's not an
outside.
apocalyptic Jew.
Well, why not?
He's anti-apocalyptic. I don't know if you've studied Josephus. Josephus is famously anti-apocalyptic. We're talking about apocalyptic Jews.
Bart assumes that they just saw something, but he hasn't explained to us what they saw. And whatever they saw changed their complete worldview.
I don't know what you see when you see your grandmother either.
Okay, but I definitely don't say she's raised from the dead.
You say she's still alive.
Well, but she's still dead, though, right?
In Jesus' case, my point is...
in our case, if you're going to use that parallel, in our case, when we see someone in the afterlife, yes, we think they're still alive in heaven, but we say they're dead here on earth.
We say their body is dead.
That's not what the early Christians said.
That's right.
They said Jesus had risen from the dead.
Right. So you need to listen. A
crucified man had risen from the dead.
Yes, you need to listen to why that is. We say their body is dead and their soul is alive because we believe in the difference between the body and the soul. Apocalyptic Jews did not. They could not say that his soul is still living because his body can't be alive unless his soul comes back into it. They don't have our view of the separation of body.
I disagree with you.
Well, look, we're going to take a break there.
Really?
We're going to take a break.
Okay, tell me some.
When a few early followers said they saw Jesus after his death, that alone doesn't prove a resurrection. Psychological studies show that grief hallucinations are incredibly common. About 13% of bereaved people report vivid visions of deceased loved ones. These aren't random. They're often shaped by cultural expectations. And for apocalyptic Jews, the group Jesus and his followers belong to, resurrection didn't mean a ghost or a soul in heaven. It meant bodily revival. Their worldview didn't support the idea of a disembodied soul living on. So if someone thought they saw Jesus, they interpreted it as a physical resurrection. Not because it happened, but because they had no other framework for understanding that experience. This isn't speculation. Jewish texts like the Book of Daniel show their belief in a future bodily resurrection, not some eternal spirit world. And when Paul writes decades later, even he never describes seeing a physical Jesus, only a revelation or vision. That suggests the original resurrection claim likely started with grief-induced visions, not an empty tomb.
Just add, Bart says this is happening all the time. Where does someone project an enemy apparition? What example
it
do you
happens
have?
sometimes. If you feel guilty, for example, if you feel guilty about what you've done to somebody leading to...
Give me an example.
Well, if you read the psychological literature on visions, you actually find a good bit of it.
Anything specific?
Well, they aren't names that you would know. They're just people. They're just people,
Pretty sure. Not in the literature. Not in the literature. No.
Okay, well, I suggest you read it.
There is no projection of enemies in the literature. Dale Allison would
yeah. So
correct you on that.
what I'd say is that some people have hypothesized that Paul felt very guilty, or that Peter felt very guilty about his denial of Jesus, and that he started out, and so because of his guilt, he saw something. It's very common. One of the most common reasons for seeing a bereaved loved one is because you felt like you mistreated them before they died, and the guilt creates and so.
But again, that doesn't guarantee saying an unparalleled claim of resurrection of a Messiah that was crucified. He could have felt like he forgave him, but it doesn't mean he would have said that.
And not only that, but I've never said it did. And so that isn't my claim.
You said that's what caused Peter's claim.
Peter did not...
He didn't claim Jesus rose from the dead?
Okay. What I've been saying is Peter did not claim that the Messiah got raised from the dead the second he saw Jesus. What he thought was Jesus had come back to life.
You're saying he figured it out as an apocalyptic Jew. I'm going with your argument, yeah. But Paul, how does Paul imagine
I was getting to that.
Crucified man
I was getting to that.
rising from the dead that he hates, that he thinks cursed by God, appearing to him? I'm looking forward to that one.
Okay, go ahead, Bart.
So Paul did not get this information from Peter and James. Paul was persecuting Christians before he ever met Peter and James. So he knows the Christian claims already. There have been a lot of psychological analyses about what might have happened to somebody who feels guilt over what they're doing to these people that would generate a vision and to have a conversion. As you probably know, there are instances in which people who are enemies of Christ have visions in which they get converted. And so Paul would be in that category.
Yeah.
Okay.
But again, Sundar Singh, by the way, would be a great example of this. This was an Indian that became a great missionary. He was burning Bibles. He was persecuting Christians in the early 1900s, and ultimately he had a vision of Jesus, and he was transformed like Paul. But again, that happened after the Christian claim has already been made.
Yes, so did Paul. So did Paul.
Yeah.
That's my point. It's exactly the same. So you can't say that it doesn't happen to enemies.
So you think he understood
because you just gave the example of an enemy where it happened.
So you think he understood the Christian claim clearly as he was persecuted?
He understood that they were saying Jesus got raised from the dead. Absolutely.
Okay. And then
why else is he persecuted?
And then he imagined on the Damascus Road.
I didn't say he imagined anything on the Damascus Road.
Well, what happened on the Damascus Road?
I just said that there are lots of options and we don't know because he doesn't tell us.
Okay. Well, he said he saw the Lord Jesus. That's what he said.
He said he saw the Lord Jesus. But what where did he see him? When did he see him? How did he see him? How close was him? Did they talk? Did they spend a week together?
Seeing him's good enough, right?
He thought he saw Jesus. I've been saying that all along. He thought he saw Jesus.
I'm not expecting.
I'm asking why you don't believe him. Why do you think Paul's wrong?
Why don't I think a person got raised from the dead?
Yes.
Oh.
Why don't you think Jesus got raised from the dead?
I don't think anybody gets raised from the dead. Okay. Because it violates the laws of nature.
Okay.
I mean,
so you have the kind of a materialist, fundamentalist view.
Well, let me ask this. You think God raised Jesus from the dead, right? Do you think God can break the laws of mathematics? Can God
can't contradict himself, no.
No,
because he is...
Exactly.
Mathematics is his language.
That's right. The other language he uses is physics. Can he break the laws of physics?
I mean, I think we're getting off.
No, we are not getting off. This is precisely... You asked me why I don't believe it. And the reason I don't believe it is because it violates the laws of physics.
And I don't think he can feed things into his system, for sure.
I don't think God can break the law of physics any more than he can break the law of mathematics.
Feeding things into his system to bring a dead person to life is not the same thing as making 2 + 2 5. That's completely different things.
They are both laws that have never been broken in history.
Except in the case of Jesus, right?
So here's the question. This is it's a very big question, because what you're arguing is that the most probable event that happens with Jesus, because Paul and Peter said it happened, the most probable thing is the violation of a law of physics that has never been violated in 13.8 billion years. Never. Except in this one instance. Now, if you're a historian, historians don't argue that something that happened only once in all of history is the most probable occurrence because somebody said it happened.
Unless there's an incredible evidence to
The incredible evidence is that Paul said
not just
so?
that. Not just that.
When someone says, Paul saw Jesus, and that proves the resurrection, they're missing a critical point. Paul himself never describes seeing a physical Jesus. He only reports a vision. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul lists Jesus appearing to people, including himself, but never says it was a body anyone could touch. And let's be clear, Paul wasn't a neutral witness. He already knew the resurrection claim. So his experience, whatever it was, came after the idea was already spreading. Visions like this are well documented. People under intense guilt, stress, or trauma often experience vivid hallucinations, especially during radical life shifts. A 2019 meta-study on religious visions showed that many so-called divine encounters happen in similar psychological states. Bart's point isn't just theory. It's supported by research in bereavement psychology, where guilt and grief often lead to mental projections of lost or even resented figures. The Christian apologist's example of Sundar Singh, someone who also had a vision and converted, doesn't help their case. It actually proves Bart's. Emotional trauma can produce powerful religious experiences that feel real, but aren't evidence of a supernatural event. And Bart nails it. If you're claiming the only time in history that the laws of physics were broken was in one unverified event 2,000 years ago based on a vision, you're not doing history. You're asking for blind faith. And historians don't work that way.
We're just getting started.
What's interesting here for me, Bart, though, is that presumably on the face of it, if you do believe that God would never, if there is a God, let's say, that God would never break the laws of physics, then on the faces of it, no amount of evidence could persuade you of a miraculous claim. You've kind of decided that before you come to the text.
What you'd have to do is you'd have to have evidence from physicists that these laws don't apply.
Okay, so you'd have to go to the physicist rather than the historian.
You certainly could prove it, because physicists...
So we need to go to the physicists for the evidence.
Well, if you're going to say that the laws of physics have been broken one time in the history of the human race, then you need pretty good evidence. And the evidence that somebody said they saw somebody...
But that's not the only evidence, and we're going to talk about more. But that's not the only evidence. We were talking about the appearances, and the appearances, I think, and you've said this, and I've appreciated you said this in how Jesus became God. You talk about how basically the evidence is consistent with if Jesus did rise from the dead. And I appreciate that, because you're saying if Jesus rose from the dead, basically the evidence we have looks the same. It would look the same. So you don't believe he rose from the dead, but the evidence does support the miracle. Do you agree with that?
No, of course I don't.
Well, okay, consistent with the miracle. Is it consistent with the miracle?
Let me put it this way. There is a famous Jewish holy man, Baal Shem Tov, who eyewitnesses have told us, lived in the 18th century, he told us he could heal the sick, he could cast out demons, he could raise the dead. We have eyewitness accounts of this. And my suspicion is that you don't think it really happened, because you'd be suspicious of those reports.
I think the fact that nobody outside of Hasidic Jews think it happened is quite
okay. Who outside of Christians think that Jesus was raised from the dead?
Pinchas Lapid. He was a Jewish historian and scholar. He wrote a book called The Resurrection of Jesus. You should read it. It's actually really good. He actually was convinced by the evidence that Jesus rose from the dead.
Right. Okay.
You should read it. It's really good.
I guess the point is, if you come to believe that Jesus has been raised from the dead physically, it's quite likely you will become a Christian. So
if you believe the miracles of Baal Shem Tov, then you become a Hasidic Jew.
And I also point out
so that is an evidence that Baal Shem Tov really did these things, because somebody believes and then converts. It's not evidence.
And I would also add that there are scholars that I appreciate, people like E.P. Sanders. I know you respect E.P. Sanders. Like in Jesus and Judaism, the way he ends is basically saying, I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
But he admits the evidence is pretty strong. There's people that admit the evidence is strong, but they still don't go all the way.
I guess my question is...
I think the evidence, though, is strong. I don't think that's...
you haven't cited any all you've cited so far are eyewitnesses. And you've agreed that eyewitnesses in other cases don't work for you, including Baal Shem Tov. And so I'd like to know, why do you choose some eyewitnesses over others?
Again, nobody... This goes back to Moroni. Nobody outside of those few people believe Moroni appeared to them. Nobody outside of certain Hasidic Jews believe that Baal Shem Tov did miracles.
How about Mormons?
How about Christians?
How about Mormons?
I just said nobody believes those miraculous claims happen outside.
Yes, well, nobody outside of the Christian faith thinks that Jesus is the Son of God who was raised from the dead.
No. But like Paul, for example, is an enemy that got convinced that Jesus rose from the dead. Who is the Paul for Baal Shem Tov? Tell me who he is.
Well, there are a lot of Hasidic Jews who didn't start out as Hasidic Jews who read these stories.
But who's a Paul? Who's someone who was persecuting the Hasidic Jews and then got convinced by the Baal Shem Tov miracles? You bring all these people up, but it's insane. I mean, Jesus is completely unparalleled, completely different than all these rest.
You are a Christian. You've always been a Christian. Of course you think that Jesus is the greatest thing ever. And so I understand
You've almost said that you think Jesus is the most compassionate, the most influential, amazing person. You've said things close to that.
No, I don't. But so you're in the Christian tradition and you want to show that you're right. And, and so, okay.
I want to just demonstrate that Jesus is Lord because
this as a historian.
Died for our sins, and I want people to know that.
Exactly. Yeah. You're a theologian, and that's fine. I have no qualms with you as a theologian. What I have qualms with is you claiming that you're doing this on disinterested historical grounds.
It's a historical religion. If it didn't happen in history, it didn't happen.
But if you're going to be a historian, you have to treat every religion equally, and not giving superiority to your particular faith.
But if you're going to be a historian, you need to be open-minded to miracles.
Yes, you're open-minded to everything.
No,
I am open-minded, yes. If you can show...
you said that the physics can't be...
I did say that.
Defied.
No. You didn't hear me.
Okay.
I said, you're saying it happened once in the entire human race. How many people have lived? I don't know how many people have lived on, billions of people. Mm-hmm. There are 8 billion people alive today. None of them is going to rise from the dead. How many people have risen from the dead? In your judgment, 1 out of, 20 billion who've lived or something. How many people have mistaken something they've seen? How many people have had a dream that they thought was something that was real? How many people have had a vision of a deceased loved one afterwards? Millions.
Right.
I mean, this is basically Hume's argument, isn't it? Against miracles. That essentially it's far.
So I'm different from Hume. I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I'm saying that if you're.
So you're saying a historian can discover miracles in history? Then you are saying that.
I wish you wouldn't put words in my lips.
Okay. Because I said you seem to be closed-minded.
Let me repeat it because I don't think you heard it. I'm saying that historians establish what probably happened on the past on the basis of probabilities. If the probability is 1 out of 800 billion or something versus 1 out of 8, what do historians think about that? Do they think it's more likely that the laws of physics are broken? Even they grant, okay, laws of physics could be, suppose they grant that. Do they say it did happen in this one instance because we have these 3 people who said it happened? Or do they say maybe they missaw something?
Okay. Justin, and then we'll move on to your next bedrock fact.
We talked about 107 billion people, that have walked the planet. That's fine. Out of those 107 billion people, how many of those people, those human beings, are worshipped by billions of people and called Lord and God today?
I don't know what the number is.
One.
So 107 billion. So how many? How many of those have been?
Let me finish my. Please let me finish my point. No. This is my turn.
Okay.
I thought
I'll let you respond.
I thought you wanted me to respond to that.
Jesus is the only.
You
person.
asked me a question.
Okay.
You asked me a question. You wanted to know how many. I was trying to answer your question. So may I answer?
Tell
your
me
question?
someone else other than Jesus that's worshipped by billions.
I'm answering by asking you.
Oh no! See, that's not. You weren't answering the question.
Okay, I will answer the question.
So let me at least finish my point.
107 billion. You can't say that more people worship Jesus now, therefore he was raised from the dead.
Okay.
Because let me finish.
Let me finish my point. I was making a point.
I'm answering your question.
You weren't answering
You asked me my question, and I'm answering it now. Let me finish my question.
And then you come back.
You say 107 billion, and since more people worship Jesus now, that's evidence.
No, that's not what I said.
Then I
so let me finish.
Okay.
So I'm saying what we have here is an extraordinary, by exactly these exact odds that you're talking about, we have an extraordinary anomaly. We have one human being who walked this earth from the last, billions of years, and however long humans have been on the earth. Out of 107 billion, this one human being is worshipped by billions and called Lord and God. I'm saying that is an extraordinary anomaly, and so I'm saying that's something that historians would go, wow, that kind of is amazing. If Jesus achieved that extraordinary anomaly, 1 out of 107 billion on that point, maybe he achieved another extraordinary anomaly. Maybe he rose from the dead.
Okay.
Are you really using that as a historical argument?
I'm using it as an argument for the resurrection, whatever you want to call it.
What kind of argument would you call it?
Well, what's your problem with the argument?
But isn't it an extraordinary anomaly that Jesus is worshipped by billions? How is a crucified man...
No, it's not an anomaly at all. I wrote an entire book explaining how it happened.
Okay, how does a crucified man in his mid-30s, how is he worshipped by billions of people today? I mean, you don't think that's not an extraordinary anomaly?
It's not an anomaly. It's
by
amazing.
definition, mathematics, 1 out of 107 billion. But I'll let you finish.
Why is that proof that he was raised from the dead? It's proof that people are convinced he was raised from the dead.
I said it's a good argument against this idea that you were making that, you're telling me only one person out of all the 107 billion rose from the dead? A historian can't say that. That's not good enough evidence. Well, here's another point on that same person that is an extraordinary anomaly.
But you can't explain that one. You can explain why there are so many billions of Christians in the world. It's not hard to explain, without a miraculous explanation. So I don't understand why you're arguing this.
But this single individual has had this kind of impact.
Yes, it's fantastic.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
So it's normal for crucified men in the ancient world that are Jews to be worshipped by billions and lay the foundations of Western civilization. This is normal.
You are not listening.
As Justin Bass grew frustrated and emotional, Bart Ehrman stayed grounded, calmly pointing out what actual historians rely on: evidence, not popularity or faith. Christianity's growth doesn't prove resurrection any more than Islam's global expansion proves Muhammad split the moon. Religious influence isn't rare. It's predictable. Sociologists and historians like Rodney Stark have shown that Christianity's rise was helped by social networks, Roman infrastructure, and centuries of political backing, not a miracle. In fact, mass belief in supernatural events happens across all major religions and cults, from Hindu milk-drinking statues to Marian apparitions. None of those are treated as historical facts, and neither should Jesus' resurrection. Bard also nailed the core problem. No credible historian would say a one-time violation of natural law is more probable than people being mistaken, especially when visions, hallucinations, and false memories are well documented in grief psychology. Studies show up to 60% of grieving people experience vivid visions of the deceased. That's not rare. What's rare is building a theology on it. So the real question is, do we rewrite physics for one ancient claim backed by a few biased followers? Or do we accept the far more likely explanation that stories evolved, beliefs spread, and people were wrong?
You made a statement a couple of months ago that I found very interesting. And I don't claim to understand it, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot with it. You said that you were a cultural Christian. Okay, and so that raised a number of questions in my mind. And the first question was,
You are changing the subject.
I'm not. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I may be leaping outside of the topic a bit to get back to it.
We can do cultural Christianity, but I think I have a list of questions that you wanted to ask, and that is one of them. But I think Professor Dawkins did ask you...
You were referring to the predictive power and to the utility of the stories.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's actually what I was trying to zero in on.
Go ahead.
Okay, so that was the point. Well, it seemed to me that your proclamation that you were a cultural Christian was a recognition and a statement that you had found something in the culture that had been derived from Christianity that you had an affinity with, and that there's some reason for that. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, well, what do you think that Christianity got right that allows you to make a statement like that? I mean, I know that there's differences perhaps in what we both think about the ultimate veracity of the biblical stories. Maybe there isn't differences. Like, it would take a lot of conversation to figure this out, but what did you mean by that? Like, what do you think that Christianity got right that would enable you to make a statement like that?
Virtually nothing. I meant by that no more than that I'm brought up in a Christian culture. I went to Christian schools. I therefore know my way around the Bible. I know my way around the Book of Common Prayer. I know the hymns. That's all. I don't value Christianity as a truth system at all.
Okay, so let me ask you about that, because maybe that's true and perhaps it's not. So the first question is, like, do you think that there are any marked differences between cultural traditions that would enable you to rank order them in terms of their ethical validity?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so for example, we could contrast mainstream UK Christianity with Islamic fundamentalism.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a hierarchy.
There is a hierarchy.
Okay, a hierarchy that points to what?
Well, in the case of Islam, I dislike any religion which punishes apostasy with death, that throws gay people off high buildings, that practices clitoridectomy. That seems to me to place Islam on a lower level than Christianity, but that's not to say anything very positive about Christianity.
Well, it might be to say something positive about Christianity. Like, I think that question is open, because you might ask yourself, what did Christianity get right that led it away from those particular presumptions and towards something that you regard as more ethically appropriate? Like, this isn't a trivial question.
It's a very modest claim. There's not very much. I mean, to be better than a religion that throws gay people off high buildings is not really a very virtuous achievement.
I don't know. I don't know if that's true, because if you look at the barbarism that characterizes the human past, you might think that any progression whatsoever towards something approximating mercy and tolerance is nothing short of a bloody miracle.
Well,
like, people are pretty ruthless, and so are our chimpanzee cousins.
Yes, they are.
Right. So,
yes.
So we move forward into the light with great difficulty.
Yes,
and
yes.
The fact that we can take that for granted now, and that it seems self-evident and deserving of faint praise, it's not so clear to me that that's a reasonable proposition.
Okay, let's grant the faint praise, but that has nothing to do with the truth value, and what I care about is the truth value. I see no truth value in the claims of Christianity, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the miracles. Do you believe in any of those? Do you believe Jesus was born a virgin?
As I said before, there are elements of the text that I don't feel qualified to comment on. My experience has been that the more, I know from a metaphorical perspective and from a mythic perspective what the story of the virgin birth means, and I accept that. I know, for example, that any culture that doesn't hold the image of the woman and infant sacred dies. And I don't know how that needs to be expressed in a form.
True, though?
Do you mean that you don't know?
Well,
Dawkins is making an evidence-based argument. Christianity as a belief system doesn't hold up to scrutiny. There's no empirical evidence for the virgin birth, resurrection, or miracles. None of these claims meet the standards of historical verification. For example, Bart Ehrman, a respected New Testament scholar, points out that the Gospels were written decades after Jesus' death by anonymous authors, full of contradictions and theological bias. That's not reliable evidence, it's religious tradition. When Peterson talks about holding the mother and child sacred, he shifts to metaphor. But metaphors don't prove anything. They might feel meaningful, but they're not evidence for a God, a virgin birth, or divinity. Dawkins stays focused on truth. Peterson avoids the question entirely. When Dawkins is asked something, he gives a clear answer. When Peterson is asked, he deflects. That's why Dawkins calls it out. Maybe Peterson doesn't actually believe these things and doesn't want to admit it. And the idea that Christianity led us toward mercy and tolerance? History doesn't support that. The Inquisition, witch trials, slavery justified by Scripture, and opposition to women's rights and science all came from dominant Christian cultures. Progress came in spite of religion, not because of it. Led by secular thinkers like Voltaire, Thomas Paine, Bertrand Russell, and modern human rights advocates. Dawkins is right to say, cultural familiarity doesn't mean truth, and religious comfort doesn't equal evidence. Let's continue watching.
Let me ask you about that, because truth, this is something I talked with Sam Harris about too. Truth, as we know, is a tricky business. Do you think there are differences in the truth claims between different writers of fiction? Like, is Dostoevsky more profound than...
No, well, I wouldn't call fiction truth claims anyway. I mean, these are...
Then on what grounds do we rank order the fiction in terms of quality? Like, Dostoevsky is a profound purveyor of fiction on the philosophical front, unbelievably deep and profound. Yes, there's something true about what he's writing about.
It's nothing to do with the truth that science is concerned with. The truth of science is the truth that gets us to the moon. I mean, this is nothing to do with whether one writer of fiction has a sort of insight into human nature. That goes without saying. I accept that. Okay,
so how do we deal with the notion that on the purely factual side, how do we deal with the idea, let's take you talked about clitoridectomy, let's talk about the oppression of women.
Yes.
We make a scientific case that that's inappropriate? Or is it a case that we're making on some other grounds? Like I see in the Judeo-Christian tradition, one of the earliest pronouncements is that both men and women carry the image of God, both. And that sets a certain tone to everything that follows. And it is a remarkable proclamation given its radical age, that both men and women carry the image of God and are to be treated as something with intrinsic value outside of the domain of power and politics. And it isn't obvious to me, having thought about this a lot, how we deal with that in the pure realm of fact. Because one of the facts is, if I can oppress you, why the hell shouldn't I?
Yeah, my job is to keep things on track here. I think there are a number of questions which Professor Dawkins has asked quite directly that we still haven't really heard an answer for.
Okay.
And Professor Dawkins asking about the virgin birth. You started talking about metaphor, you started talking about myth. I think anybody listening to this conversation will understand that maybe a society that doesn't believe in the virgin birth won't work. Maybe that's the predictive power that you're talking about. But I think you must understand that when Professor Dawkins is asking you, do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? He means something like a biological fact. And by the way, saying I don't know, or saying, I'm not qualified to comment, is an answer to that question, but is that your answer, that you don't know?
I said earlier, and I would hold to this, is that there are elements of the text that I don't know that I'm incapable of fully accounting for. I can't account for what the fundamental reality and significance of the notion of the resurrection is. My knowledge just ends.
Sure, but
I know that whatever happened whatever happened as a consequence of the origination and the promotion of the Christian story was powerful enough to bring Rome to its knees and demolish the pagan enterprise. So there's some power in that story that's remarkable.
Let's stick to the virgin birth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the virgin birth results from a mistranslation of Isaiah. You know that.
Like these sorts of questions, what would you say? They don't strike me as, they're not getting to the point.
I know
the
that.
story
I know
has
you
a
think
purpose.
that. Yes.
Well, and look, I understand that there's perfect reasons to debate this. I know that, and I know that your question is more than valid, but it's beside the issue as far as I'm concerned, and it's partly because, well, when we started this conversation, I said, for example, that it appears to be the case that a description of the structure through which we see the world is a story. We see the world through a story. And so that's a remarkable thing. That's a remarkable discovery, and it's emerged probably in the last 60 years in multiple disciplines, because we have to prioritize our facts. And so we prioritize them according to a particular pattern. And there are patterns that seem to work and to propagate themselves properly and to orient cultures towards life abundant. And there are other patterns, the pattern of Cain, for example, that lead to absolute bloody devastation. And I don't know exactly how to construe that sort of truth. But we talked about the oppression of women, for example. It's like, how do you make a case on purely factual grounds that women should be treated as equals?
It's a moral question, and
I know that's exactly.
And I was dealing with a factual question, which is, did Jesus have a father? And you won't answer it.
Well, Jesus had an earthly father and a heavenly father, like almost all mythological heroes.
So he wasn't born of a virgin, then. So you're saying that Jesus was not born of a virgin?
I said, first of all, that I don't know how to mediate the fact-value dichotomy in that case. I said the same thing about the resurrection.
It's not a value. It's a simple fact. I mean, did a man have intercourse with Mary and produce Jesus? That's a factual question.
Dawkins asked a simple question. Was Jesus born of a virgin? Peterson danced around it for minutes without answering. That's exactly the problem Dawkins is pointing out. If the core claims of Christianity can't be answered as facts, they collapse under basic scrutiny. The virgin birth isn't just unverified, it's based on a mistranslation. The original Hebrew word in Isaiah 7:14 is alma, which means young woman, not virgin. The Greek Septuagint mistranslated it as parthenos, meaning virgin, and that error made its way into the Gospels. Scholars like Bart Ehrman and Geza Vermes confirm this. It's not controversial, it's academic consensus. Peterson tries to say these stories are powerful because they moved culture, but power doesn't prove truth. Islam, communism, and Nazi ideology also moved millions. That doesn't make them true. He also claims Christianity elevated women. But the Bible repeatedly treats women as property. Exodus 21, Deuteronomy 22, and even Paul's letters instruct women to submit. The real progress for women came through secular law, civil rights movements, and feminist philosophy, not scripture. And when Dawkins asks again, did Jesus have a human father? Peterson still won't say. That's why Dawkins is right. If the answers don't hold up when plainly asked, then the claims don't deserve to be treated as truth. Let's keep watching.
It's not a value question.
You must understand what you're being asked here, that even if you think that, say, the author of the biblical texts intended much more significance than a simple scientific analysis of events, Professor Dawkins is interested in scientific truth. That's the kind of truth that he's interested in. And even if you think it's irrelevant to the point of what the gospel authors were getting at, that first needs to be clarified before you can then begin actually uncovering what the stories are about. So I think Professor Dawkins is asking from a scientific perspective, and maybe you think that that scientific approach is wrong, but if you just take it for a moment, maybe this is how we find out that it is wrong. Let's take a scientific approach, ask the question, did this occur?
I think that it's inappropriate to use a question like that to attempt to undermine the validity of the entire, what would you say, deep mythological enterprise.
Well, suppose we weren't doing that. Suppose we were asking out of interest. Suppose that we were all here devout Christians, maybe even Jungian Christians, and we thought, this is interesting, over dinner. Do you think it really happened, like scientifically? Would your answer just be, I don't know?
Yes.
And you wouldn't consider it, I mean, it's not an inappropriate question to ask, just on a point of interest.
Right.
Did this really occur? And I think so often people are asking you that, and especially given the context of this conversation, we've heard everything that you're saying about metaphor and myth, but because the question is still then being asked, did it really happen? You know that that's what you're being asked. And the way you just so easily said yes, I wonder why you struggle to do that in so many other circumstances.
I think because I don't look at the situation the same. The way that Dr. Dawkins and I look at the situation are really quite different, and at many, many, many levels. You know, so even on the meme question, for example, you know, like, I know the literature on the history of religious ideas. I see how these ideas have battled across millennia in a manner that is very reminiscent to me of the same sort of claim that Dr. Dawkins is putting forward with regards to meme. I know that literature. Dr. Dawkins doesn't know that literature. And it's very difficult for me to communicate from within the confines of that literature because it's extensive and deep. And we're dealing with things that we don't understand the relationship between metaphoric truth and value predicated truth and factual truth. We don't understand that. It's a big problem. There's no evidence whatsoever from the scientific perspective that we can orient ourselves in the world merely in consequence of the facts.
Sure.
And that's a fact. And it's a fact that's been detailed out in great detail in the last 60 years by people from a variety of different disciplines. We have to prioritize the facts. That's a value hierarchy. There may be true and false ways of prioritizing facts, but you can't determine the truth or falsehood of the way that you prioritize facts by making reference to the facts. That's a big problem.
Okay, let's talk about that as perhaps a slight detour here, because I think we do need to come back to this Christ resurrection thing. But Professor Dawkins, would you say that underlying the scientific enterprise is a fundamentally unscientific assumption? You can make scientific investigations in the world, but in order to do so, you need to choose what to prioritize. You need to choose what to investigate. You also need to value the truth. You need to have a value and a motivation for doing it in the first place. Those kinds of things cannot themselves be scientifically justified. And so does the scientific enterprise have an unscientific assumption of the space?
I suppose it does. I mean, I think that maybe just be Jordan and Richard, by the way. I think that Jordan prioritizes myth and I prioritize fact. And I think myth is kind of vaguely interesting, but it's not the be-all and end-all of my life. I think it's somewhat secondary to scientific fact, the sort of facts that tell us how old the universe is, how old the world is, the history of life, the engineering achievements of landing a spacecraft on a comet. These are the things that science can do. And as I said, the predictions of quantum theory, to come back to that, the predictions of quantum theory, which are verified to a sufficient number of decimal places that it's equivalent to predicting the width of North America to one hair's breadth. Now, that is, however difficult quantum theory is to understand, that is what you can get from quantum theory. Now, the mysteries of the Bible, if they are mysteries, aren't in the same league. I mean, they just don't cut it.
Peterson keeps dodging a basic question. Did the virgin birth or resurrection happen as a fact? He talks about myth, metaphor, and the power of stories, but that's not the issue. Dawkins is asking for evidence, not symbolism. Peterson claims truth can't just be about facts, but that's not how we build reliable knowledge. Science is based on observation, testing, and replication, and it works. We can date the Earth to 4.54 billion years with radiometric dating. We can trace the evolution of life through fossils and DNA. And we can land probes on comets using quantum calculations accurate to fractions of a nanometer. That's truth we can build on. Compare that to the Bible. No evidence for a global flood, no external confirmation of the Exodus, and no verifiable proof of a virgin birth or resurrection. These aren't mysteries. They're claims made without evidence. Peterson wants to treat myth as equal to science, but stories are not substitutes for facts. And when Peterson says Dawkins doesn't understand religious literature, that doesn't change the problem. Truth claims require evidence, not familiarity with ancient texts. Dawkins is right. prioritizing facts over comforting myths is how we make progress. What do you think? Should society lean on ancient stories, or should we demand truth backed by real evidence? Like the video, subscribe for more sharp commentary, and let's keep thinking critically, together.